Captain Adrian rode through the cobblestone streets of Willowbrook as the morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings. His horse, Thunder, stepped proudly beneath him, their hooves creating a steady rhythm that echoed off the stone walls. This was their daily patrol through the kingdom's most peaceful village, a routine that had remained unchanged for 3 years. Thunder was more than just a mount to Adrian. The magnificent black stallion had served alongside him through countless missions, from dangerous border skirmishes to ceremonial parades at the royal palace. Their bond went beyond that of rider and horse. They were partners who trusted each other completely. The village of Willowbrook was waking up to another ordinary day. Shopkeepers opened their wooden shutters, releasing the sweet scents of fresh bread and brewing tea into the crisp morning air. Children ran laughing through the streets, their voices mixing with the sounds of merchants, calling out their wares, and craftsmen beginning their daily work. Adrian smiled as he watched the familiar scenes unfold around him. This assignment to patrol Willowbrook had initially seemed like a punishment after his controversial actions during the siege of Greystone Keep, but over time, he'd come to appreciate the peace and simplicity of village life. "Good morning, Captain Adrian," called out Martha, the baker, as she arranged fresh loaves in her shop window. "Will you be stopping for your usual apple tart today?" "Perhaps on the way back, Martha," Adrian replied with a wave. "Thunder here has developed quite a taste for your cooking." The horse whinnied softly, as if understanding the conversation about food. Adrian patted Thunder's neck affectionately, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the glossy black coat as they continued down the main street. Adrian noticed something unusual. A small crowd had gathered near the village well, their voices carrying tones of concern and distress. In his 3 years of patrolling Willowbrook, such gatherings were rare and usually indicated some problem that required his attention. "Let's see what's happening, Thunder," Adrian murmured. Guiding his horse toward the commotion, the crowd parted respectfully as the royal guard approached. In the center of the gathering, Adrian saw old Henrik, the village's most respected elder, kneeling beside a mangy brown dog that appeared to be injured. The animal was panting heavily, its ribs showing clearly through matted fur. "What's the situation here?" Adrian asked, dismounting from Thunder to get a better look. "This poor creature wandered into the village sometime during the night," Henrik explained, his weathered hands hovering uncertainly over the dog. "It's clearly starving and hurt, but it won't let anyone get close enough to help." Adrian studied the dog more carefully. Despite its pitiful condition, there was something in its eyes that suggested intelligence and desperation rather than mere wildness. The animal's coat, though dirty and matted, showed signs that it had once been well cared for. This wasn't a stray that had always lived on the streets. "Has anyone seen this dog before?" Adrian asked the gathered villagers. Heads shook all around. The dog was definitely not from Willowbrook, which raised questions about how it had arrived. In such a remote village, the nearest settlements were days away by foot, an almost impossible journey for an animal in such poor condition. "Captain," said young Tom, the blacksmith's apprentice, "I tried to give it some water earlier, but it snapped at me. Look at those scars on its legs. Something terrible happened to this animal." Adrian could see the scars Tom mentioned, old wounds that had healed poorly, suggesting the dog had endured significant trauma. But what caught his attention most was the animal's behavior. Despite its obvious hunger and thirst, it kept looking around nervously, as if watching for some threat that only it could perceive. Thunder had remained calm during the discussion, but now the great stallion began to show signs of unease. His ears flicked back and forth, and he stepped sideways nervously. Adrian had learned to trust his horse's instincts. Thunder often sensed danger before humans could detect it. "Everyone step back," Adrian instructed, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Something's not right here. The villagers began to move away from the well, but their retreat was too slow. The dog suddenly leaped to its feet with surprising energy, its eyes fixed not on the humans around it but on Thunder. Without warning, the animal launched itself directly at the horse's legs, snarling with desperate fury. Thunder reared up on his hind legs, his iron-shod hooves flashing dangerously close to the villagers who were scrambling to get out of the eye. "Way." Adrian grabbed for the reins, trying to control his panicked mount while avoiding the snapping jaws of the attacking dog. "Get back!" Adrian shouted to the villagers. "Everyone get clear." But the dog's attack wasn't random or mindless. As Adrian struggled to understand what was happening, he noticed that the animal seemed to be trying to drive Thunder away from the well, not simply attacking out of aggression. The dog's movements were purposeful, herding the horse away from the stone structure. Thunder's training as a war horse kicked in. Instead of simply fleeing, the stallion began to fight back, his hooves striking at the dog with calculated precision. But something extraordinary happened. The dog didn't dodge or retreat. Instead, it pressed its attack even more fiercely. As if the horse's resistance only made it more determined, the villagers watched in shock as the confrontation escalated. This was unlike any animal behavior they had ever witnessed. The dog seemed driven by something beyond hunger, fear, or territorial instinct. Adrian finally managed to get a firm grip on Thunder's reins and pulled the horse back several steps from the well. Immediately, the dog stopped its attack and collapsed to the ground, panting heavily. Its eyes remained fixed on the well, and its body trembled with exhaustion and pain. "What in the kingdom's name was that about?" Henrik asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Adrian stared at the dog, then at the well, then back at the dog. A terrible suspicion was beginning to form in his mind. The animal's desperate behavior, its focus on driving them away from the well, the way it had ignored its own safety to accomplish this goal, it all pointed to something that made his blood run cold. "Henrik," Adrian said quietly, "when was the last time anyone drew water from this well?" Henrik's weathered face creased with thought as he considered Adrian's question about the well. "Yesterday morning, I believe. My granddaughter Sarah came to fetch water for her mother's washing. But now that you mention it, she did complain that the water tasted strange." Adrian felt his suspicions solidifying into certainty. The dog's behavior made perfect sense if it was trying to warn them about something dangerous in the well. But how could an injured stray animal know something that the villagers didn't? "Where is Sarah now?" Adrian asked urgently. "At home with?" "A fever," Henrik replied, his expression growing worried as he began to understand the implications. "She's been sick since yesterday afternoon. We thought it was just a common cold, but what if it wasn't?" Adrian finished the thought. He looked at the dog, which had dragged itself to a position where it could still see the well while remaining at a safe distance. The animal's eyes held an intelligence that was becoming harder to ignore. "Everyone, listen to me carefully," Adrian announced to the gathered villagers. "No one is to draw water from this well until we determine what's wrong with it. Tell everyone in the village, use the stream beyond the miller's house for now." The crowd began to murmur with concern and confusion. The well had served Willowbrook faithfully for generations. The idea that it might be contaminated was almost unthinkable. "Captain," said Alina, the tavern keeper, "what makes you think there's something wrong with the water? We've been using this well for decades without problems." Adrian pointed to the exhausted dog lying nearby. "This animal attacked my horse not out of aggression, but to drive us away from the well. It ignored its own pain and weakness to warn us about something. That's not normal animal behavior unless there's a very good reason." Tom, the blacksmith's apprentice, stepped closer to examine the dog. "Captain, look at this collar around its neck. It's partly hidden by all that matted fur, but it looks like good leather. This was somebody's pet, not a wild animal." Adrian knelt beside the dog, moving slowly to avoid startling it. The animal watched him warily, but didn't attempt to attack. Up close, he could see the collar Tom had mentioned. It was indeed quality leather, though badly worn and damaged. "Easy there," Adrian murmured to the dog as he carefully examined the collar. Hidden beneath layers of dirt and fur, he found a small, brass nameplate. The engraving was partially obscured, but he could make out the name Rex and what appeared to be part of an address. "This dog's name is Rex," Adrian announced to the villagers. "And according to this collar, he belonged to someone. The question is, where did he come from, and how did he know about the well?" Henrik leaned heavily on his walking stick, his face pale with worry. "Captain, if the well is truly contaminated, we need to know immediately. Half the village draws their daily water from there. If people are going to get sick like my Sarah, ... The implications were staggering. Willowbrook had over 300 residents, most of whom relied on the central well for their daily water needs. If the water was indeed poisoned or contaminated, they could be facing a disaster that would affect the entire community. Adrian made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Instead of sending for help or waiting for official procedures, he decided to investigate the well immediately. "Tom, bring me the longest rope you can find," Adrian ordered. "Lena, I need lanterns, as many as you can gather. Henrik, can you think of anyone in the village who might have seen where this dog came from?" As the villagers hurried to fulfill his requests, Adrian studied Rex more carefully. The dog's wounds were telling a story of hardship and determination. Some of the scars were old, but others looked recent, as if Rex had traveled through dangerous terrain to reach Willowbrook. Thunder had calmed down now that they were no longer near the well, but the horse remained alert and nervous. Adrian had learned to trust his mount's instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that danger remained nearby. Tom returned with a coil of sturdy rope, while Alina arrived with 3 oil lanterns and several villagers carrying additional supplies. The growing crowd reflected the seriousness of the situation. Word was spreading quickly through Willowbrook that something was wrong with their water supply. Captain Alina said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding the dog's warning. My grandmother used to tell stories about animals that could sense things humans couldn't. Poisoned water, dangerous gas, even earthquakes. If this dog really is trying to protect us," Adrian nodded grimly, "that's exactly what I'm afraid of. And if Rex traveled here from somewhere else to warn us, it means the danger might be bigger than just our village well." He secured one end of the rope around his waist and prepared to descend into the well. The stone structure was old, but sturdy, its walls lined with carefully fitted blocks that had withstood decades of use. However, as Adrian peered down into the depths, he could see that something was definitely wrong. The water level appeared normal. There was an unusual sheen on the surface that caught the lantern light strangely. More troubling was the complete absence of the usual sounds associated with a healthy well, no movement of small creatures, no gentle echo of dripping water. "Lower me down slowly," Adrian instructed Tom and the other men who were managing the rope. "If I signal for you to pull me up quickly, don't hesitate." As Adrian descended into the well, the air grew progressively colder and more stagnant.
About
Halfway down, he encountered a smell that made his stomach lurch, the unmistakable odor of death and decay. Something had died in the well, contaminating the entire water supply. But when his lantern illuminated the water surface, Adrian discovered something far worse than a dead animal. Floating in the contaminated water were several cloth bundles, and from their size and shape, he realized with horror that these weren't the remains of livestock. "Pull me up," Adrian shouted urgently. "Pull me up now," as he was hauled back too. The surface, Adrian's mind raced with the implications of what he had seen. This wasn't an accident or natural contamination. Someone had deliberately poisoned Willowbrook's water supply, and Rex had somehow known about it. The dog had tried to warn them. And now Adrian understood why the animal had been so desperate. In its attack on Thunder, Rex wasn't just protecting them from contaminated water. He was trying to prevent them from discovering evidence of a crime that could have implications far beyond their peaceful village. When Adrian emerged from the well, his face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he untied the rope from his waist. The gathered villagers could see from his expression that he had discovered something terrible. "What did you find down there?" Henrik asked, dreading the answer. Adrian looked at the faces of the people he had sworn to protect, then at Rex, who was watching him with those intelligent, desperate eyes. The truth was going to shatter their peaceful world, but they had a right to know. "The well has been deliberately poisoned," Adrian announced, "and there are bodies down there. This isn't an accident, it's murder." The villagers stood in stunned silence as Adrian's words sank in. Murder in Willowbrook seemed impossible. This was a community where neighbors helped each other, and the most serious crime in recent memory had been the theft of chickens from Farmer William's coop. "Bodies," Elena whispered, her face draining of color. "How many bodies?" Adrian's jaw tightened as he recalled what he had seen in the murky water. At least 3, possibly more. They've been down there long enough to contaminate the entire water supply. Henrik leaned heavily against his walking stick, looking every one of his 70 years. Captain, who would do such a horrible thing? And why target our village? We have nothing of value, no enemies, no reason for anyone to want to harm us. That was the crucial question, and Adrian suspected that Rex might hold the answer. The dog had somehow known about the contamination and had risked everything to warn them. That suggested Rex had witnessed whatever happened to put those bodies in the well. Tom, I need you to ride to the next village and send word to the capital, Adrian ordered. Tell them we need investigators and healers immediately. Alina, start spreading word that no one is to use well water for anything not drinking, cooking, or washing. As the villagers hurried to follow his instructions, Adrian approached Rex slowly. The dog watched him with wary intelligence, its breathing labored, but its attention focused. Easy, Rex, Adrian said softly, extending his hand for the dog to smell. You tried to warn us, didn't you? You know what happened here? To his surprise, Rex struggled to his feet and began limping away from the well. After a few steps, the dog turned back to look at Adrian, clearly expecting him to follow. Henrik, Adrian called to the elder, I'm going to follow Rex and see where he leads me. Keep everyone away from the well until help arrives. Thunder followed as Adrian walked. Behind the limping dog, who seemed to know exactly where he was going, despite his obvious pain and exhaustion, Rex led them through the village streets, past the familiar shops and houses, toward the eastern edge of Willowbrook where the forest began. The dog's path took them along the stream. That would now serve as the village's water source. Adrian noticed that Rex avoided drinking from the stream, despite his obvious thirst. This suggested that the contamination might extend beyond just the well. After walking for nearly an hour, Rex stopped beside a large oak tree at the forest's edge. The dog began pawing at the ground beneath the tree, whimpering softly as if trying to communicate something important. Adrian examined the area where Rex was digging and found disturbed earth that had been hastily covered with fallen leaves. Using his sword, he carefully scraped away the debris and discovered buried supplies, rope, shovels, and several empty bottles that still carried the sharp smell of poison. This is where they prepared, Adrian realized aloud. Someone buried their supplies here after contaminating the well. Rex limped to another spot nearby and repeated his pawing motion. This time, Adrian found tracks in the soft earth boot. Prints that were too large and too uniform to belong to any of the villagers. These were military boots worn by trained soldiers. The implications sent a chill through Adrian's heart. This wasn't random violence or banditry. Professional soldiers had deliberately poisoned Willowbrook's water supply, which meant this was either an act of war or part of some larger military operation. Thunder whinnied nervously. His ears pricked forward as he detected sounds from deeper in the forest. Adrian drew his sword and listened carefully. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of horses and men's voices. They're still here, Adrian whispered, understanding finally dawning on him. Rex, they're still in the area, aren't they? The dog's ears flattened against his head, and he pressed himself low to the ground in a posture of fear and submission. Rex had escaped from whoever had poisoned the well, but his tormentors were still nearby. Adrian faced a terrible dilemma. He could return to the village and wait for reinforcements from the capital, but that would take days. Meanwhile, the soldiers who had committed this atrocity were somewhere in the forest, possibly planning additional attacks on other villages. His duty as a royal guard was clear. He had to investigate and, if possible, stop whatever larger plan was unfolding. But he was only one man, against what appeared to be an organized military force. Rex seemed to understand his uncertainty. The dog struggled to his feet and began limping deeper into the forest, stopping every few steps to look back and ensure Adrian was following. You want me to find them, don't you? Adrian asked the dog. You want justice for what they did. Thunder tossed his head nervously but followed as Adrian made the decision to pursue the trail deeper into the woods. His war-trained stallion was worth several ordinary soldiers in a fight, and his own skills had been proven in numerous battles. The forest grew denser as they followed. Rex along what appeared to be an old hunting trail. Adrian noticed more signs of recent passage, broken branches at horse height, disturbed undergrowth, and the distinctive smell of leather and metal that accompanied armed men. After another mile, Rex stopped and crouched low, his entire body tensing with fear. Through the trees ahead, Adrian could see smoke rising from what appeared to be a temporary camp, moving as quietly as possible. Adrian crept forward until he could observe the camp without being detected. What he saw confirmed his worst fears and added a new dimension of horror to the situation. The camp contained about 20 soldiers wearing the black and silver colors of Raven's Hollow, a neighboring kingdom that had been at peace with Adrian's realm for over a decade. But these men weren't on a peaceful mission. In the center of the camp, tied to posts like animals, were 3 people Adrian recognized as travelers who had passed through Willowbrook the week before. They were alive, but clearly terrified, and their presence explained the bodies in the well. The soldiers had been using the travelers as test subjects, forcing them to drink the poisoned water to determine how quickly and effectively their contamination would work. The bodies in the well were probably earlier victims of these horrific experiments, Adrian realized. He was witnessing something far more sinister than a simple attack on Willowbrook. This was a test run for a larger military operation. Raven's Hollow was developing methods to poison water supplies before launching a full-scale invasion. Rex had somehow escaped from this camp, probably after witnessing the murder of his owner. The dog had then traveled to Willowbrook to warn the villagers before they could become the next victims of Raven's Hollow's twisted experiments. As Adrian watched the camp, he saw one of the soldiers approach the bound prisoners with a water bottle. The man's intention was clear. Another round of testing was about to begin. Adrian faced the most difficult decision of his military career. He could retreat to safety and report what he had discovered, but the prisoners would certainly die before help could arrive, or he could attempt a rescue that would almost certainly cost him his own life. Rex looked up at him with those intelligent, desperate eyes, and Adrian understood what the dog was asking of him. Rex had risked everything to save the people of Willowbrook. Now it was Adrian's turn to decide how much he was willing to sacrifice for justice. Adrian studied the enemy camp with a soldier's trained eye, looking for weaknesses in their defenses and patterns in their movement. 20 armed men against 1 royal guard and an injured dog seemed like impossible odds, but Adrian had learned during his years of service that impossible situations sometimes required impossible solutions. The Raven's Hollow soldiers were confident and careless, clearly believing they were operating in complete secrecy. Their sentries were positioned to watch for approaching forces, not for a single infiltrator. Most importantly, they had made camp in a natural depression that could work to Adrian's advantage if he could find the right approach. Rex seemed to understand that Adrian was planning some kind of action. The dog had stopped trembling and was watching the camp with focused attention, as if waiting for a signal. Rex, Adrian whispered, I need you to understand something. I'm going to try to save those people, but I'll need your help.
Ow.
Can you do exactly what I tell you to do? The dog looked at him with those remarkably intelligent eyes and gave a small nod that seemed almost human in its deliberation. Adrian realized that Rex wasn't just an ordinary dog. There was something special about this animal's ability to understand complex situations. Adrian's plan was born of desperation and the slim hope that surprise could overcome superior numbers. He would create a diversion that would draw most of the soldiers away from the camp, then attempt to free the prisoners while the guards were distracted. Moving carefully through the underbrush, Adrian positioned himself uphill from the enemy camp. He gathered dry branches, leaves, and anything else that would burn quickly and create lots of smoke. The forest was dry enough that a fire would spread rapidly if not contained. Rex, he whispered to the dog, when I give you the signal, I want you to run down to the camp barking as loudly as you can. Make them think you're rabid or crazy. Can you do that? Rex's response was to bare his teeth and produce a low growl that sounded genuinely menacing despite his weakened condition. The dog understood exactly what was being asked of him. Adrian struck flint to steel and ignited his pile of combustible material. Within minutes, thick smoke was billowing up through the trees, and the first flames were beginning to spread along the forest floor. "Now, Rex," Adrian commanded. The dog launched himself down the hillside, barking and snarling with a ferocity that belied his injuries. To the soldiers below, it must have seemed like a wild animal was attacking their camp in broad daylight. The reaction was immediate and exactly what Adrian had hoped for. Most of the soldiers grabbed weapons and rushed toward the source of the commotion, shouting about a rabid dog in the smoke that was now visible through the trees. "Fire in the forest," one of the soldiers yelled. "If it spreads to the camp, we'll lose everything." Adrian watched as 15 of the 20 soldiers ran toward the smoke and the apparently mad dog that was leading them away from their prisoners. The remaining 5 guards stayed with the captives, but their attention was focused on the chaos rather than on potential rescue attempts. This was Adrian's only chance. Drawing his sword, he moved swiftly down the hillside toward the camp. Thunder followed, his hooves silent on the forest floor thanks to years of training in stealth operations. The first guard never saw Adrian coming. A single sword thrust ended his life before he could raise an alarm. The second guard turned at the sound of his companion falling. But Thunder's iron-shod hoof caught him in the head before he could shout a warning. "Who are you?" one of the remaining guards demanded, raising his crossbow. "Identify yourself." "I'm Captain Adrian of the Royal Guard," Adrian replied, advancing steadily. "And you're under arrest for murder and acts of war against innocent civilians?" The guard's response was to fire his crossbow, but Adrian's shield deflected the bolt harmlessly. Before the man could reload, Adrian's sword had found its mark. The final 2 guards rushed Adrian together, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. But they had made the mistake of fighting a mounted opponent in an open space. Thunder's training as a warhorse proved decisive as the stallion struck with hooves and teeth while Adrian's sword flashed in deadly arcs. Within minutes, all 5 guards were dead, and Adrian was cutting the ropes that bound the terrified prisoners. "Can you walk?" Adrian asked the first captive, a middle-aged merchant named Robert, whom he recognized from the man's previous visits to Willowbrook. "I think so," Robert replied weakly. "Captain, they've been poisoning people. They made us drink, contaminated water, and watch to see how sick we became. They're planning to do this to entire cities." "I know," Adrian said grimly. "That's why we have to get you out of here immediately." The other prisoners were a young woman named Sarah and an elderly priest called Father Benedict. Both were weak from their ordeal, but able to move with assistance. In the distance, Adrian could hear the soldiers shouting as they fought the forest fire and chased Rex through the underbrush. His diversion had worked, but it wouldn't hold there. "Attention much longer. Mount up behind me," Adrian told the strongest of the prisoners. "We'll have to ride double and move fast." But as they prepared to flee, Rex came limping back into the camp, his fur singed and his breathing labored. Dogue had successfully led the soldiers on a chase through burning forest, but the effort had exhausted his remaining strength. "We can't leave him," Sarah said, despite her own weakness. "He saved all of us." Adrian looked at the exhausted dog and made another decision that would prove crucial. Rex had risked everything to warn the village and help with the rescue. The least Adrian could do was ensure the brave animal's safety. "Thunder can carry him," Adrian decided, lifting Rex carefully onto the horse's back. "We all go together, or not at all." The escape from the forest became a desperate race against time. Behind them, the Raven's Hollow soldiers had discovered their dead comrades and were now in full pursuit. Adrian could hear horses crashing through the underbrush as the enemy mounted their own chase. Thunder performed magnificently, carrying his extra burden through difficult terrain at speeds that would have been impossible for most horses. But even the great stallion had his limits, and the pursuing soldiers were gaining ground. Captain Robert gasped as they crested a hill. "I can see the village ahead. But there are more soldiers coming from the east. We're trapped between 2 forces." Adrian saw the truth of Robert's observation. Another group of Raven's Hollow soldiers was approaching Willowbrook from the opposite direction, probably intending to complete their testing by poisoning the entire village population. People of Willowbrook were about to be caught between two enemy forces, with only one royal guard and an injured dog to protect them. The odds were impossible, but Adrian had come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now. "Rex," he said to the dog, "I hope you have one more miracle in you, because we're going to need it." The final battle for Willowbrook was about to begin, and everything would depend on whether a royal guard, his horse, and a heroic dog could somehow overcome an entire company of enemy soldiers. As Thunder galloped toward the village with his precious cargo, Adrian's mind raced through possible strategies. Two forces of enemy soldiers were converging on Willowbrook, and the villagers had no idea they were about to become targets in a larger war. "Robert," Adrian called to the merchant clinging behind him, "when we reach the village, I need you to ring the warning bell at the church. Get everyone to the town hall. It's the strongest building we have. What about you, Captain?" Sarah asked weakly. "I'm going to buy you time," Adrian replied grimly. As they thundered into Willowbrook's main square, Adrian could see the confusion on the villagers' faces. Tom the blacksmith was still organizing the rope and supplies from their well investigation, while Henrik was directing people away from the contaminated water source. Enemy soldiers approaching from both sides, Adrian shouted as he reined Thunder to a halt. "Everyone to the town hall immediately. This is not a drill." The word sent a shock through the peaceful village. In seconds, the morning routine dissolved into controlled chaos as families grabbed children and ran for shelter. Adrian helped his rescued prisoners down from Thunder's back, noting that Rex was barely conscious, but still alert. "Henrik," Adrian called to the village elder. "How many men do we have who can fight?" "Perhaps 15 with hunting experience," Henrik replied, his face pale but determined. "Tom has some skill with weapons from his smithing work. But, Captain, we're not soldiers." "Today you are," Adrian said firmly. "Tom, gather every man who can hold a weapon. Knives, axes, hunting bows, anything that can hurt an enemy. Position them at the windows of the town hall." Through the growing commotion, Adrian heard the unmistakable sound of approaching cavalry. The eastern force was closer than he had estimated. They would be in the village within minutes. Thunder pawed the ground nervously, sensing the approaching battle. The great stallion had carried them through the escape. But Adrian could see that even his magnificent horse was reaching the limits of endurance. Rex struggled to his feet on Thunder's back. His ears pricked forward despite his exhaustion. Dog was looking toward the eastern approach with an expression of fierce determination that reminded Adrian why this brave animal had risked everything to warn them. "Easy, Rex," Adrian murmured, gently lifting the dog down. "You've done more than enough. Rest now." But Rex had no intention of resting. Despite his injuries, the dog limped toward the eastern edge of the village, taking up a position behind a cart where he could observe the approaching enemy. The first Raven's Hollow soldiers appeared at the village outskirts just as Tom finished, distributing weapons to the available men. Adrian counted 12 riders in the eastern force, elite cavalry by the look of their equipment and formation. Remember, Adrian called to his improvised militia? "We only have to hold them until help arrives from the capital. Make every shot count and stay behind cover." The Raven's Hollow captain rode forward under a banner of parley, but Adrian could see the contempt in the man's eyes. This was no negotiation. It was a demand for surrender. "I am Captain Matthias of Raven's Hollow," the enemy officer announced. "This village is now under military occupation. Surrender immediately and your deaths will be quick." Adrian stepped forward, his sword drawn and his Royal Guard uniform clearly visible. "I am Captain Adrian of His Majesty's Royal Guard. You and your men are guilty of murder and acts of war against innocent civilians. Surrender now and face justice, or be destroyed where you stand." Captain Matthias laughed coldly. "One Royal Guard against my entire company? You're either very brave or very stupid." "Both, probably," Adrian replied. "But I'm not alone." At that moment, Rex began barking with a ferocity that seemed impossible given his condition. The sound wasn't random, it was a signal, and it was answered by howls from the forest on both sides of the village. Adrian stared in amazement as dozens of wolves emerged from the tree line, their eyes fixed on the Raven's Hollow soldiers. Rex had somehow called his wild cousins to join the battle, and they had answered. "What sorcery is this?" Captain Matthias demanded, his horse dancing nervously beneath him. Not sorcery, Adrian realized with growing hope. Leadership. Rex isn't just a dog, he's an alpha, and he's called his pack to defend the village. The wolves spread out in a coordinated pattern that would have impressed any military tactician. They didn't attack immediately, but positioned themselves to cut off retreat routes and create a confusion among the enemy horses. Thunder seemed to understand that reinforcements had arrived. The great stallion reared up on his hind legs, his war cry echoing across the village as he prepared for battle. "Attack!" Captain Matthias shouted, but his command was met with chaos. The wolves struck with perfect timing, not targeting the soldiers directly but focusing on the horses. Trained war horses were formidable in battle, but they were still prey animals at heart, and the sight and smell of a wolf pack triggered their deepest instincts to flee. Within moments, half the Raven's Hollow cavalry was on the ground as their mounts bucked and reared in terror. The soldiers who managed to stay mounted found themselves fighting not just Adrian's militia, but a coordinated pack of predators that seemed to anticipate their every move. Adrian spurred Thunder forward, his sword flashing in the morning sun. As he engaged Captain Matthias in single combat, the enemy officer was skilled, but he was fighting a mounted opponent whose horse showed no fear of the surrounding wolves. The battle raged through Willowbrook's streets, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The wolves had turned the tide, and the village militia, inspired by their unexpected allies, fought with courage they never knew they possessed. When the dust settled, most of the Raven's Hollow soldiers were dead or captured. Captain Matthias himself lay wounded, but alive, his sword broken and his arrogance replaced by fear. But even as Adrian secured the eastern force, he could hear the approach of the second enemy group from the west. The battle for Willowbrook wasn't over yet. Rex limped over to where Adrian stood beside Thunder, the dog's tail wagging weakly despite his exhaustion. Round them, the wolves waited for their next command, their yellow eyes reflecting an intelligence that matched their canine leaders. "Think you can manage one more fight?" Adrian asked Rex. The dog's answer was to throw back his head and howl, a sound that was answered by every wolf in the pack and echoed by Thunder's own battle cry. The second wave of enemies would find Willowbrook much better defended than they expected. The western force of Raven's Hollow soldiers approached Willowbrook to find their path blocked by the most unusual army in military history. Captain Adrian sat astride Thunder in the village square, his armor dented but his sword still sharp. Around him, 15 villagers held improvised weapons with the confidence of men who had already tasted victory. But the most remarkable sight was Rex, standing at the front of a pack of 30 wolves, his injured body somehow radiating the authority of a natural leader. The dog had transformed from a desperate refugee into a general commanding forces that answered to no human authority. "This is impossible," muttered Commander Victor, the leader of the Western force, as he surveyed the scene. "Wolves don't fight alongside humans." "Today they do," Adrian replied, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Because they understand something you don't, the difference between protecting innocents and slaughtering them." The second battle was even more decisive than the first. The wolves had learned from their initial engagement. Their tactics were now perfectly coordinated with Adrian's strategy. The enemy soldiers found themselves facing an opponent that fought with both human intelligence and animal instinct. Thunder moved through the battle like a force of nature, his hooves and Adrian's sword working in perfect harmony. But it was Rex who truly commanded the field, directing his pack with barks, howls, and movements that seemed to convey complex tactical information. When reinforcements from the capital finally arrived 3 hours later, they found Willowbrook secured and the surviving Raven's Hollow soldiers under guard. Captain Adrian was sitting beside the village well, carefully tending to Rex's wounds while Thunder grazed peacefully nearby. Captain Adrian called Sir Marcus, the royal investigator who had been sent to handle the crisis. "Your message about poisoned wells and enemy infiltration seemed almost unbelievable. But seeing this," Sir Marcus gestured toward the captured soldiers and the wolf pack that was now resting in the shade of the village buildings. How did you manage to defeat an entire company with only village militia? Adrian looked at Rex, who was finally allowing himself to rest after his heroic efforts. I had exceptional help, Sir Marcus. This dog discovered the poisoning plot, led me to the enemy camp, rescued prisoners, and somehow convinced a wolf pack. To defend innocent civilians? A dog did all that? Sir Marcus asked skeptically. Rex isn't just any dog, Henrik interjected, approaching with a piece of parchment in his weathered hands.
Captain, we found this among the belongings of one.
Of the prisoners you rescued, it explains quite a lot. The document was a letter, water-stained, but still readable. It told the story of Dr. Edmund Hartwell, a royal researcher who had been traveling to the capital with crucial information about Ravenshallow's secret weapons program. Dr. Hartwell had been captured along with his companion, a remarkably intelligent dog he had trained to assist in his scientific work. Rex belonged to a royal scientist, Adrian realized, reading the letter, that explains his unusual intelligence and his ability to understand complex situations. According to this, Sir Marcus added, examining the document, Dr. Hartwell had discovered that Ravenshallow was planning to use poisoned water supplies as a weapon of war. He was bringing evidence to the king when he was captured. The implications were staggering. Rex hadn't just stumbled upon the enemy plot. He had witnessed the murder of his master and somehow understood that he needed to warn others about the danger. The dog's desperate journey to Willowbrook had been a mission to complete his dead master's work. What happens now? Lena asked, speaking for all the villagers who had gathered to hear the investigators' conclusions. Now, Sir Marcus announced formally, Willowbrook is going to be honored by the king himself. Your village uncovered and stopped what could have been the beginning of a devastating war. He turned to Adrian with obvious respect. Captain, your actions here have saved countless lives. You'll be promoted and awarded the highest military honors. Adrian nodded his acceptance, but his attention remained focused on Rex. The dog was finally able to rest, surrounded by his wolf pack and secure in the knowledge that his mission had been completed. What about Rex? Adrian asked. What happens? To him, Sir Marcus smiled. I think that's obvious, Captain. Rex has proven himself to be the most valuable intelligence asset in the kingdom. He'll be officially enlisted in the Royal Guard with full honors. The villagers cheered at this announcement, but Rex seemed unimpressed by the prospect of royal recognition. The dog was more interested in the bowl of fresh water that Martha had brought from the clean stream, the first safe drink he had allowed himself since beginning his desperate mission. Thunder whinnied softly and nuzzled Rex's head, a gesture of respect between two warriors who had shared danger and victory around them. The wolf pack began to disperse back to their forest homes, their temporary alliance completed. As evening fell over Willowbrook, Adrian found himself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. A routine patrol had become a battle for survival, and an injured stray dog had proven to be the hero who saved not just a village, but potentially an entire kingdom.
X.
Adrian said softly to the dog, who was now wearing a collar bearing the insignia of the Royal Guard. Your master would be proud of what you accomplished. Rex looked up at him with those remarkably intelligent eyes and wagged his tail once, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed both grief for what had been lost and hoped for what was to come. The morning patrol was over, but the partnership between Captain Adrian, Thunder, and Rex was just beginning. Together, they would serve the kingdom with the kind of courage and loyalty that legends are made of. In the months that followed, bards would sing songs about the Battle of Willowbrook, where a royal guard, his warhorse, and a heroic dog led an army of wolves to victory over superior forces. But for those who were there, the real story was simpler and more profound. It was about the power of courage, the strength of loyalty. It's the remarkable things that become possible when different species unite to protect what matters most. Rex had completed his mission, honored his master's memory, found a new family among those who understood that true heroism comes not from strength or numbers, but from the willingness to risk everything for others. The morning sun rose. The next day, over a village that would never be the same, and three friends who would never again patrol alone,